So a lot of people use incorrect terminologies when it comes to interfaces. An interface, by the dictionary meaning, is that two parties, they're going to communicate. So it is party 1, it is party 2, and they are going to communicate in some way. And then if I have to give a real life example of something, I'm going to draw the electricity socket board, which is going to have a couple of openings, holes, and in these holes we use our chargers, and then plug them in, and be connected to our laptops and computers. Right? This is an example of an interface. An interface enables communication between two entities. This side is the hardware that we are using, and then this side is the electricity providers, right? They could be generating electricity using a lot of things. They could probably be using the windmills, they could probably be using the hydraulic forces in generating electricity here, or they could be burning down a lot of coal at a very high speed, and through thermal energy plant, they will be generating these electricity plants that are getting delivered to us through these high tension, low tension cables, and eventually it comes to outside our house through a transformer box, and then this transformer box is connected to the electricity wiring in our at our places, right? And then what we implement at our end is a charger that converts the AC once again back to DC current, and then this DC powers are a lot of devices. There could be a refrigerator that we can connect, and we consume this power, right? So interface, it enables communication between two parties. One is the provider, and the second is the consumer. In programming, the concept is almost the same. You define an interface with the interface keyword, and then you define, like a class name, you define the what the interface is going to do. So I can put an example. So the standard is that you define the name of an interface with a capital I letter, and let's continue with the electricity example. Okay, so the electricity example is going to have uh, a function like consume electricity, something like this, right? And let me go ahead and change the return type from void to an integer. Now this interface is going to be used in two separate places. One is going to be the provider of the electricity, and one is going to be the consumer of the electricity. For the provider, let's go ahead and create a class, and it is going to be, say, the electricity board, and it is going to inherit. I'm probably giving an incorrect example. I'm not going to call consume electricity. I'm just going to say that electricity. And notice that once again, we are using the colon sign over here, right? This colon does not mean inherit. Inheritance is only for classes. When you are putting an interface on the right side of the colon sign, you are implementing it. Implementation is different than inheritance. So always, before you use these two words, be very careful as to what is on the right side. If it's a class, you are inheriting. If it's an interface, you are implementing. By implementing, the electricity board is going to provide a function like this. Probably it is going to be public, because you would want other people to access this object. And what it is going to do is it's going to do a lot of things. We don't know how the electricity is generated, so I'm just going to put comment section here. I'm going to say use wind energy to generate electricity. Now this comment here, it actually represents this super complex mechanism of installing these devices and generating power out of them and connecting them to these uh, electricity delivery units. When this happens, you are going to generate certain number of units. So I'm simply going to come here and I'm going to say return. I generated 1000 units. So the generation part is complete, and when you are putting interfaces alongside the class definition, by implementation, you are providing that service. As a consumer of this service, I'm going to create another class. I'm going to call it consume electricity, right? And those who consume, they do not put anything over here. I'm going to type it, but we are not going to put it. This is not required. If you are a provider, you don't need this line. If you are a consumer, you don't need this, definitely. Right? Only the providers are going to have it in the inheritance hierarchy chain or the implementation hierarchy chain. The consumers of the interface, they create a member variable of it. So I'm going to say that I use electricity, and then I'm going to declare a variable called electricity, and probably as a consumer, okay, so let's not even call it consume electricity. I'm going to say a fridge. So fridge consumes electricity, and then when somebody says void turn on, to turn the refrigerator on, the first thing that I'm going to use is at least say 20 units of electricity. So I'm going to say, or say 1000 units of electricity. Units assigned to, and I'm going to say underscore electricity dot. I'm going to change this name to electricity dot generate electricity. So when I do this, it is going to go and invoke this function, and then I'm going to say, now that we have power, the fridge is on. Okay. The way this electricity is going to get consumed is somebody is going to give us this object, or probably you're going to say that underscore electricity is assigned to new electricity board object, and this board kind of knows how to generate electricity. We're going to get electricity, and once we have that, we're going to turn on our fridge. Okay, so interfaces in this example is this little socket. Alright, the left side of this interface is the electricity board where the generation is going to happen. The right side is where the consumption is going to happen, and this interface is going to help the two parties connect. The reason interfaces are so important and so essential is because they disconnect the two parties. Now, the electricity was probably invented somewhere in the 18th century, right? The laptop that you're working on probably was invented in the 70s and 80s, right? 60s, 70s, 80s, whenever. There was a huge gap of about 150 years, 160 years. It is because of this interface that you can consume it with anything that is new is coming up. The guy who invented the electricity did not know that Steve Jobs is going to come up with an iPhone. An iPhone is going to require charging, and that charging is going to require the electricity current. The provider simply provides the services that they have or they can, and they expose it to the external world through these three through these sockets, and then we consume it from that point onward. What goes here is completely our genius, and then how we consume this or how they provide this is their genius. So interfaces are completely different than abstract classes. Abstract classes, they define relationship between two objects. Interfaces, they help two disconnected parties communicate. Right? And then when we come to the programming world, our examples, they are going to change. The interfaces that we have, they will let us communicate to databases, right? So what we are going to do is we are going to define an interface, and we are going to call it DB connection or iSQL connection, something like this. And it is going to have, from our previous sections, it is going to have the CRUD operation. We're going to do select, insert, update, and delete. And then there will be this interface. On the consumer side, we are just going to create an object of IDB underscore DB, and underscore DB dot something. We are going to say that get student information. This interface is going to go to this database and extract out student information for us. Right? Through this, we can communicate to any database in the world that we want. We don't have to restrict ourselves to Microsoft SQL. We can switch to Mongo. And then when we switch, we don't have to break anything on this side, right? Just because you are switching your electricity provider from, say, wind energy to hydraulic energy, you don't have to buy a new fridge, right? It is the same mechanism, that as long as the provider is implementing the interfaces the right way, we don't care what they do inside. If they use SQL database, they use Mongo database, or they use plain old file system, right? As long as when we say that get me student information, it is giving us the student information, we are good, right? And that's why you have to be very careful where to implement the interface and where to consume the interface, right? So with that,